Hey you, Nina here. You're officially listening to Triggered Can We Play With That wherever you get your podcasts. You might also be watching us on YouTube, wherever you are coming to us from. Welcome. So, what are we going to be talking about today? Today, my friend, is all about boundaries. I want you to be a boundaries boss, even if you start out feeling like you're a boundary baby, okay? Boundaries are our friend. I used to have a mentor I will never forget that said to me, Nina, boundaries are a friend to the boundaryless. And I was like, wow, that really does, that tracks there. So we are going to be playing with this, which means I want you to get a journal or a really good friend to dialogue with so we can genuinely explore this. I am all about your self growth and us making it to that next level, which means if you keep on listening, guess what? You and me, we are consenting to play with the idea of boundaries. Now, of course, we can't cover all the facets of things that we would want to cover about boundaries. However, we are going to cover at least one facet. You know, I'm going to give you a story. You know that I'm going to give you some psychoeducation, a little bit of some perspective offering, and then I'm going to give you a challenge for your upcoming week so that you can flip the script in your life. Y'all know we only have 3 episodes left in this year. Only 3 episodes left. So let's keep playing. Let's level up whenever you're listening to this, right? You might be listening to this after the fact. However, we are going to continue on. So you know at this point that I am so curious. Are you ready to play?
Welcome to Triggered. Can we play with that? You know that moment when your emotions ramp up in an instant, leaving you feeling helpless, frozen, or out of control? In that moment, you've been emotionally hijacked, the very definition of triggered. And I want to ask you, can we play with that? I'm Nina L. Garcia, drama therapist and empowerment coach of Houston Creative Arts Therapy. Join me as we discover ways to empower you and the people who mean the most to you to transform hard conversations into teachable moments. Triggered. Real playful, real respectful, real empowered.
Let's take a breath. And I hope that you genuinely take that breath when I invite you to do so. We've already had 2 skills for you to practice. The first one was in our intro, you giving yourself consent to continue to engage in something, okay? Practicing your consent, especially with today's episode about boundaries, is gonna be really important, okay? The second thing, being able to take a breath, not just frivolously, not just because, but because it is an invitation to bring yourself back into the present moment, to ground and recenter. So again, now that you know this, take that breath in, and ground and recenter. Before we launch into story time, our segment where I tell you a story. So here's the thing. I'm going to tell you about my most recent birthday. Yes, as an adult person in this world, I like to dress up and have a lot of fun. I like to play characters. I like to be expressive. And my most recent birthday, we were all, oh, sorry, not my most recent birthday. Oh, this is a year ago. Oop, lies. It's too early. I'm recording this episode. All right, come back here with me. Last year on my birthday, we dressed up as the theme was Lost Boys from Hook, right? If you haven't seen Hook, highly recommend it. Very entertaining, family staple in our household. But we were all lost boys or, themed characters from Neverland or from this movie Hook. And one of the multiple events that we had for my birthday was we were doing a night hike through the woods. Now, I want to be really clear contextually. My party is for adults. Thematically, we have a theme, right, that we are playing with. So we are doing a night hike, something adventurous through the woods. I'm super stoked because if you've never done a night hike before, I highly recommend it. If you want something that's a little bit racy, a little bit edgy, but is totally like I don't want to say like it's safe, quote unquote. It's a little risky, right? But it's a calculated risk, okay? Things that are in our woods don't include like wolves and lions or whatever things might exist in woods in other places, right? Things in our woods in Houston include you might run across an armadillo or a possum, which I've done. Coyotes are a thing. I did have a pack exit at the end of that. That was a, interesting moment, but I digress. A bunch of adults walking through the woods dressed as characters. And one of the things that came up on this adult walk, right, was adult conversation. And at some point, we were talking about different things of an intimate, sexual, and sensual nature, right? Close your ears now if you're not ready to hear this, but this is just a bit of the story that we're going to be playing with. And so, some of the people who were on this trek feel very comfortable talking about this, right? I have like people from all different walks of life, people who are therapists, people who work in stores, people who do not work or at-home mothers, people who don't have children and are, single, ready to mingle, all sorts of things going on. And we're there having these conversations of a sexual nature, and we're talking about these topics. And it occurs to the group that some of the people are very comfortable talking about this, and some of the people are not comfortable talking about this. And as we're having this conversation, someone pops up and says, it's occurred to me that we're talking about this, but, like your siblings are here. You don't feel awkward about that? And this question was directed at me. And I honestly stood there and I said, no, actually, it never occurred to me to think this might be uncomfortable for my adult siblings to hear us have a consensual conversation as adults about sex. And so, while for me this wasn't weird, wasn't odd, didn't feel like I'd violated or crossed any boundaries, I became very aware all of a sudden that it was very possible that for other people, the conversation may have crossed their boundaries, right? Now, no one had expressed a boundary or discomfort. There was just this question of, you don't feel awkward about that? And I didn't, and that was true. But then I had this moment. I thought, wow, you've brought in such a great question. I can open this up to the group. Is anybody not comfortable about this? We don't have to talk about this. We can absolutely switch gears, right? And it wasn't just me, running this conversation. It was a lot of us. And so it was an interesting space to be in, but I share this with you. Not the theme of today's episode will not be about exploring your sexual boundaries, although I invite you to explore as you will as a consenting adult, just so we're clear. But today's episode is about our difference in boundaries and whether your boundaries work for you. Many of us grow up in families that do not give us healthy boundaries, that give us rigid boundaries. Some of us grow up in families that give us healthy boundaries, right? And some of us feel like we grew up in a family that give us no boundaries. We don't know how to contain. We don't know how to give a boundary. So as I share this story with you, that is the first thing that I want you to think about is we're doing an exploration of boundaries. And it actually turns out that, it's not good boundaries or bad boundaries. It's not that black and white. Boundaries run along the spectrum, right? It turns out, right, that there's a spectrum when it comes to our idea of boundaries and how comfortable are we with our relationship with our own boundaries. Also, since we're talking about you and yourself, you want to think about the other people. How are other people with your relationship with your boundaries? Okay. So I don't want us to get caught up too much, but in this first section, I've told you a mini story and I want you to put yourself in the story when it comes to exploring your boundaries. How aware of them are you? And can I give you a little creative more story? Okay. Get out your journals because this is the next thing that I want you to save on. When you are imagining your own boundaries, I want us to imagine that we have 3 different spots where you could be. Yes, we've got really rigid on one end, really boxed in boundaries. It's really tight. You feel like it's dangerous to step out and try new things, right? Really, really rigid boundaries. And on the complete flip side of rigid boundaries, we have completely expansive, open, well, seemingly no boundaries, right? Goes anywhere. Emotions are all over everyone else, right? Just sort of like an explosive flower is how I imagine it. Versus the other one, which is like this really closed up flower. Okay. So if you are a totally closed up flower on one end, or if you are an exploding flower, petals everywhere on the other end, right? Let this metaphor speak for you, like, oh, yeah, that's me. But I said there were 3 points, right? It is possible that you are in the middle as a flower that has bloomed, but is not exploding and is not closed up rigidly, refusing to open, right? This flower that is bloomed in your own special way, right? Maybe you're a rose, maybe you're a lily, maybe you're y'all, plants are not my thing. I'm a therapist. Fill in the blank with other plants that are here, different types of cactus or fungi or vines, whatever your jam is. I hope that you're getting the idea of we're trying to discover, are you more rigid? Are you more expansive, right? Seemingly difficult to find your boundary, or are you somewhere in the middle? Now, most of us are going to be somewhere in the middle, but I want you to generally be able to place yourself as you continue to move through this episode. Which one of those 3 spots are you in? Write that down, click save, right? Because now we're going to move forward with your metaphor. Beyond the flower metaphor, here's the other one that I usually use. I want you to imagine that you, as the beautiful human being that you are, have your own property that you've been giving, like your soul's property, your spirit's property, your existence's property. Right now, this is a metaphorical property, of course. But as you imagine this property, I want you to imagine that you have land, okay? Now, I don't care if there's mountains on your land or fields or plains or farms, or I don't know, if it's all water patties, it doesn't matter what's on your land. But I want you to ask yourself, at the center of my land, if I had a house, what does that house look like? Right? If I had something to house me, what does it look like? Do I live in a mansion at the center? Do I have a castle? Right? Do I have a maze at the center? Do I live in a tent? Do I feel like I have nothing at the center to hold me down and shelter me and moor me at my core, right? What's going on at the center of my property? And then I want you to start to think about the boundaries on this property as you move from the center out. As you venture out from the center, I want you to ask yourself, is my property the kind of property that has no boundaries at all? No fences, no gates, no walls. Nina, I can see for miles all around me. You can talk about anything with me. I'm going to talk about anything with you. Discomfort is not a thing for me, right? That's that expansive, seemingly boundaryless, right, individual who may struggle because it is difficult for them to even understand why a boundary might be necessary or even recognize someone else's boundary because it hasn't existed on their property, so to speak. Yeah. So that's the one end. If you're there, no judgment, but ask yourself, is that where I want to be? Question mark. Is that where I want to be? And if it's not, let's keep listening and figuring out how you can redefine that relationship with your boundaried self. Okay. But let's say that's not you. You come from the center of your property. We're going to go back to the center, right, of the beginning of this metaphor. And you venture on out to your property and you're like, oh, Nina, it turns out I don't really leave the center of my property, right? I've got this like 12-foot tall brick, wall right outside my property. And, I can't really see the sunshine from here, but, I get fresh air, I get enough fresh air. And, I had this really like this like intense gate that's iron and it just closes down, so I keep out people. Maybe I don't have as many friends as I'd like to, but I'm safe here. I'm safe here, I think, right? Now, of course, I'm playing with this idea, but if you're like, oh my gosh, this is me, this individual may struggle with being able to engage in life, even in ways that would be seemingly not risky, like meeting up with someone new at a meetup, right? A public, safe meetup, right? Where you can try something new would be maybe outside the bounds for that person because the boundaries are so rigidly trying to keep that individual in and safe. But it also stops them from experiencing the fullness of life, right? It's limiting. Those boundaries may be too limiting. So here's the thing. I am not here to judge that if that's you. If that version and existence of your, spiritual embodied experiential property, if your experience of you and your boundaries is that, and it's working for you, then my hat is off to you. Keep doing what you're doing. But if it is not working for you, and it is not working for the people around you, ask yourself, are you open to redefining that relationship with your boundaries? This making sense so far? Okay, yes, I hope you've all have noticed we've entered the, psycho education and perspective offering section of our episode, right? I'm asking you to think about things in a new way. So we've got two different relationships there with boundaries, but I did say there was this third, right? You might be somewhere in the middle. If you're somewhere in the middle, come back to the beginning of this creative metaphor. You're at the center of your property and you start to venture out. You might notice, you know what, Nina? At about 15 feet out around me, I've got this 3, 4 foot tall white picket fence. It's got a gate in it. I can see people over it, but, and the gate is closed, but I get to decide, when it opens and when it closes. And occasionally somebody wanders in and then I just show them the door, but Nina, sometimes the gate gets knocked down. Sometimes it's left open by people I didn't even realize left it open. And you know what, Nina? I noticed outside of this, I have some other, boundaried areas and some other buildings on my property, but some of the fences have been knocked down. And with some, people and spaces on my property, I realize I haven't taken the time to set a boundary, and I think I might really need to. It's starting to leak out into other spaces of the property. You see what this metaphor is offering. If you are the individual who sort of has boundaries and is working toward, repairing boundaries or even adding new boundaries for your right safety and the safety of others, then you might be somewhere in the middle. Then you ask yourself the same question as these other two spaces. Am I okay with this? Am I open to redefining this relationship with my boundaries? Yes, yes. Okay. So I hope that this has been helpful so far. I've given you a perspective offering. I've given you some creative spaces for you to go and explore your relationship with your boundaries. And then we move into section 2, right? How do I redefine my relationship with my boundaries, Nina? I'm open to this. I want to do this. And whether that means you want to find out how to set a boundary or what a boundary even looks like, or whether you need to expand your boundaries so you have a little bit more space to experience life, or repair boundaries, right? Wherever you are, I want you to take what is happening in your metaphor and I want you to find its parallel in reality. Here's what I mean by that. I want you to click save on this, take from the metaphor and figure out what is the parallel in reality. So here's what I mean by this. I'm going to give hopefully 3 examples. You've got the individual who says, I've got no boundaries. I don't even know what a boundary looks like. It sounds like we need to figure out what type of boundaries exist. Do you recognize when someone says, I've got a fence, 3 foot tall fence with a gate. I've got this in my imagery. And what that is in reality, right? That may parallel reality is I can tell you when I'm uncomfortable and I'm not going to shut you down for it. And also I can still see you and have a conversation with you over this gate, right? In reality, I can set a boundary with you. That's what that looks like, right? If you are the individual who has that iron gate, right? Option number 2 here, an iron gate in your metaphor, right? That is right outside your home. In reality, might be, Nina, I'm harsh and cold and willing to cut people off. And that keeps me from getting to know people. That's my reality. Okay. Again, how does the metaphor paralleling your reality? If you're in the middle, you say, Nina, I had a fence, with this person or with this space or with this theme or topic in the world. And I noticed that the fence was down. How is that paralleling in reality? It's you being able to say, I used to have a boundary with this person. Maybe when we first started dating or when we first met each other, when I first started this job, whatever that is for you. And then over time, somebody pushed and pushed and pushed, and that fence got knocked down. And maybe you put it up and you put it up, and then maybe you got tired of constantly having to go back and put that up after this person just kept pushing on your boundaries, right? That's the parallel in reality, is that it was pushed over so many times. We just need to learn, how do we maintain that boundary? So this brings us to our third question, clicking save. And also I'm saying, hey, get ready to write this down, right? Click save. How do you intentionally move forward being a boundaries boss, even if you feel like a boundary baby? My challenge to you for the upcoming week is to figure out what specifically is needed to move forward for you to feel more confident in your relationship with your boundaries. So here's what I mean by this. Let's review. Okay, let's review. First things first, are you giving yourself consent to play with this? Second thing, are you taking a breath in order to ground yourself and give yourself some centered clarity to really explore and play with this material? For some people, this is going to be really triggering. For other people, it's going to be like a piece of cake, and most of us will probably fall somewhere in between because it's new, right? So those are the first, 2, 3 ones that we have. But here are the next bits that I said. What is your relationship with your metaphor, with your boundaries, using the metaphor, okay? What did that metaphor look like for you? What is going on with that property? If you are creative, go take to a drawing. If you like to write poetry, write us the poetry of that, right? I mean, do it for you, right? But this is an invitation here to explore this. And so your creative metaphor, that next bit that we did, how do you find out how the metaphor parallels reality? And here, my friend, this is your challenge for the upcoming week. You take all of that knowledge, all that goodness that you were just courageously willing to explore. You take that and then you say, here is my commitment for the upcoming week. I am going to, here are some options, right? I am going to, A, start noticing other people's boundaries because I'm challenged figuring out even what it looks like for me. B, I am going to start to breathe in and try to soften my boundaries because I have that iron gate up and I really would like to engage more in life. C, I have this boundary that I had set, and you know what? I think I need to figure out how to reset it and maintain it. Okay. Now, of course, these are options for you, but my challenge for you to be really clear this upcoming week is to commit, if this is the right time for you, to redefining your relationship with your boundaries. Now, caveat here, or little warning or notice, don't try to do them all at once. If you've got to listen, you're like, Nina, I got 12, 15, I got a bunch of boundaries I'm going to set. Don't do that this week. Pick one, okay? Pick one as my invitation, if you can, even just to think about it, or maybe even to actually go on and figure out what is it that you need to commit to redefining that relationship with your boundaries and actually intentionally moving forward so that you can level up as a boundaries boss. Yes? Okay. So I hope that this has been helpful for you. That is how I'm inviting you to accept your adventure challenge for the upcoming week and flip the script in your life. This podcast is all about helping you transform hard conversations into teachable moments. Talking about boundaries, usually a hard conversation. What you have just done today is explore territory and how to transform that into a teachable moment. So my hat is off to you. I'm incredibly proud of you out there just for listening in. And if this has been helpful, my friends, please, so that I know that this is reaching people and that this is helpful, share this episode with somebody you know who can explore or would benefit from exploring their boundaries, right? Post it, share it, save it if you want to come back to it. And if you're like, oh, this was gold, please go give us a review wherever you're listening to podcasts, or like the video if you're watching us on YouTube. This is how we share that this has been helpful in today's world. Yes. So thank you so much for listening and exploring your triggers as a human being. Otherwise, stay curious.